you have to have credibility as a revenue leader. If you're a channel leader, you are also a revenue leader within your company, because your CRO and your CFO need to understand that the channel is a viable and critical part of the overall revenue plan.
This is Get It Together, the podcast where partnership and go-to-market leaders share the real stories behind programs they've built and scaled. Hello, everybody. In this episode, I chat with Amy Henderson, who is the VP of Client Relations at Channelnomics. She has spent over 15 years working with leaders across the channel, everybody from chief channel officers to the CRO, CFO. We have a lot of conversations about, in 2026, what are the things that channel leaders really need to be thinking about to ensure they get a seat at the table. And we go through a really solid framework on how to build that credibility, how to get yourself that seat at the table. We talk about the hard inputs you need to speak the language of the business, which is often a financial language. We talk about how you run a capability and capacity audit against your existing set of customers. We talk about how you turn that into a plan. And then from that plan, how you move into partner recruitment. And then how do you really work with your partners to make sure they know how to hunt and you can drive pipeline together. Really, really solid conversation. A lot to take away. Hope you enjoy.
Every year, we put together the PartnerStack Women in SaaS report, where we look at fresh data and real perspectives on what it actually looks like to build a career as a woman in this industry. This year's Women in SaaS 2026 report findings paint a pretty nuanced picture. There's real progress we're celebrating. There are still systemic gaps we can't ignore. And there's a growing group of women across leadership, revenue, partnerships, and operations who are actively shaping where SaaS goes next, just like our guest today. If you'd like to dive deeper on the data for AI, ecosystem operations, and the work women do every day, you can download the report at partnerstack.com.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Get It Together. Today, I am with Amy Henderson, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation as we have tried to schedule a few times through a couple, I think, illnesses between the two of us. So I'm glad that we are here. Amy is the VP of Client Relations at Channelnomics, and over the past 15 years has done some tremendous work in all things channel, in all things SaaS, and all things go-to-market. Amy, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Why don't we tell folks a little bit about Channelnomics, what the company does, what you're doing over there, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a nutshell, Channelnomics, we're a global analyst and research firm that helps technology vendors build, optimize, and scale channel and ecosystem programs. We deliver research, diagnostics, program design, go-to-market planning, and ongoing enablement, really turning vision into value through evidence-based strategy and executive workflows. Tyler, more than half of SaaS companies say partnerships are our top revenue driver, but turning partnerships into predictable revenue is what's tough. So at Channelnomics, my work sits right in that gap, taking big partner strategy ideas and turning them into believable, defensible revenue plans. Leadership teams actually fund.
You said a couple of things in there: evidence-backed, predictable, data-driven. Why stress those things? Is that a gap that you folks saw in the market? Is that what you're trying to bring to the table?
Yeah, when you think about it, and we'll go into more of this, as I know it's a big part of our subject matter that we're talking about today, but I joined the channel pretty early in my career, right? My first job out of college was an inside sales representative at a small IT distributor, working directly with resellers to move product to end users. That experience gave me a ground level education, how the channel really works, what motivates resellers, what slows them down, and how incentives drive behavior. Later, as I moved into alliance and channel leadership roles across multiple tech companies, I saw the same pattern over and over. There are two mindsets inside partner programs. There's channel strategy that has to do with tiering, NDF, incentives, enablement, and design. And then there's channel revenue, which has to do with capacity, pipeline contribution, selling behavior, and targets. And the two don't automatically speak the same language. And that gap is where credibility is won or lost. So when you think about what CFOs and what executives really look for in terms of matching channel strategy with revenue, it all comes by passing those sniff tests, if you will, by making sure your strategy meets revenue targets. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, no, I love this. We're diving right in. So, I know in your role now, you're certainly working with a lot of customers across functions. You're working with CROs, you're working with partner leaders, you're certainly, interfacing with CFOs. One of the things I'm always interested in is how are various leaders across functions, how do they view partners? How do they view partnerships? How do they view the channel? What are some of the things that you're seeing and some of the things that you're helping bridge across the CRO, the CEO, the CFO, the channel leader? Like, how do you ensure that partnerships is being viewed as a meaningful contributor to revenue when sort of what you just alluded to, like sometimes there's a little bit of a gap, there's a bridge you need to build between the activity and the revenue contribution. There's a lot I just said there. If we start just with the functions, the senior functions across go-to-market and then the CFO, certainly, what are some of the things that you're seeing there?
Yeah, that's a great question. When you think about it, partnership leaders really need to earn their place at the executive roundtable by matching partner contributions to credible revenue. At the end of the day, whether you are a finance leader as in a CFO or a VP of finance or a sales leader, whether you're a CRO or a leader of a company, a CEO, or on the board, there's different things that you need to prove and not just a wish list or not just an assumption that the channel is going to do things. You have to match it to the language that they speak. Otherwise, they are not going to put import and value into your program, and your initiatives are probably not going to get funded, right? So one of the things that I refer to when I'm counseling channel leaders is when you were thinking about your channel strategy and your revenue plan and really marrying those together, how are you passing the executive sniff test, if you will? Now, this could be a CFO sniff test. It could be a CRO sniff test. But whatever that test is, your goal is to make sure that what you are proposing is matching what they expect. So really, the moment it clicked for me when I transitioned from more of a individual contributor supporting channel to more of a channel leader is that even the smartest partner programs won't get funded unless you can show and prove credible math, right? So for example, CFOs invest in outcomes, not optimism. So you have to demonstrate believable contribution, modeling capacity, conversion rates, timelines. That's something that I constantly reinforce. The proof is in the pudding, and it's numbers, numbers, numbers. You have to show how you're gonna improve that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I agree on the sniff test. I think I've seen a lot of plans that, might sound great, but they're backed by a lot of hope, a lot of optimism that, maybe doesn't pass that sniff test. It doesn't pass the believability test. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. One of the things you mentioned around partner leaders need to earn the seat at that table, a seat at the revenue table. What have you seen block them from earning that seat? Is it just not passing the sniff test, not speaking the language of the business? Is it as simple as that? Are there any other things you would point to? I was curious there.
It's a good question, right? So credibility is the number one driver, right? So I mentioned earlier, if you are a partnership leader, you always don't have a seat at the board, whether, your board consists of your executive staff, your private equity firms, or, your board of investors, whatever that may be. If channel is an afterthought, one of the biggest challenges that partner leaders have is earning that seat at the table or earning a voice from the C levels to be your advocate when you're not in the room. And the way that you do that is credibility, plain and simple. You have to speak the finances, the finance language, the leadership language, the executive board. You have to speak their language. And it's based on evidence-based plans, capacity modeling, instrumentation that proves source influence across the buyer journey, right? So, the ecosystem, the partner ecosystem is expanding, influence spans, pre-sales, evaluation, adoptions. Leaders who can quantify that influence and automate workflows behind them and prove that, again, MDF maps to activity, that maps to pipeline, that maps to booking, that maps to revenue. If you can map that and show that, and also pinpoint the gaps and show your roadmap there, that is speaking the language of an executive staff.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. So I often say the language of the business is a financial language. It sounds like you're suggesting the same thing. A few other components, not strictly a financial language. But to me, what that's always meant is you really need to understand the CFO, how they think about the business, measure the business, how they're making decisions around resource allocation. And so I'd love to start with the CFO. When you think about the language of a business being a fairly financial language, what are the things that you've typically seen a CFO look at? Like, what are the inputs into a plan that gives you the foundation that, you're setting yourself up for a good conversation with the CFO? Like, what should the partner leader be understanding about their financial team to make sure that they are speaking their language?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so glad you mentioned inputs because, when you think about putting together let's say a playbook for a plan, if I'm a partner leader and I'm planning for next year, where do I start? And I always recommend starting with 5 core steps. And the first one is you got to start with hard inputs, targets, budget, NDF, capacity. Before you build anything, lock in your hard inputs. That's what CFOs look for. That's the language that they speak. So when you look at some of these hard endpoints, think direct plus indirect revenue targets. Know those. What are they? Expected contributions from your partners. How are they going to reach those indirect revenue targets and how do they compare against your direct revenue? Budget and DF have hard inputs associated with both of those and have reasoning and a plan behind that. And then what are your quarterly success definitions and how are you measuring those against those success, right? What are those key performance indicators? And then you need to ask your CFO or your CRO, what does success look like in numbers for you? And what's funded to get us there? So plannings fail when assumptions drift or inputs aren't aligned early. So whatever your hard inputs are, make sure that they are aligning with what success looks like in numbers for your CFO and your CRO.
I love that. That's a great playbook. The one piece that you mentioned, so you have 5 steps. We're talking about number 1, hard inputs. Within the hard inputs, the partner targets, what they plan to contribute. How do you work with partners to get to a place where that is believable, right? You're now relying on sort of a third party where, you have a relationship, you have joint plans, but how do you work with them to get to a place where you're accurately forecasting what contributions they can make? Any thoughts there on how to work with your partners to really nail that down?
Tyler, I'm so glad you asked that question because that really dovetails well into the second piece of that roadmap, which is you need to run a capability and capacity audit, right? So you started with the hard inputs. You've asked what success looks like in numbers. You made sure that your targets, budget, NDF has matched what success criteria is for your C levels. Now you need to run a capacity and capability audit because not every partner can hunt. Right? People say, well, we need partners that can hunt. Our partners are hunters. Are they really? So you really need to know the signals of real capacity. And these signals include things like dedicated quota carrying sellers within your resellers or within your partners. ICP, ideal customer profile alignment. Their marketing muscle, what does that look like? Do they have a demonstrated source pipeline? And what is their operational maturity, right? So you look at those 5 key elements and you map each partner's realistic capacity to targets. And the gap that exposes there is not a hindrance, but it actually becomes your roadmap, right? So often our diagnostics at Channelnomics often reveal hidden constraints, enablement gaps, friction points, or misaligned incentives that really can help you build that roadmap. So really look at it as an audit, but also the way to build your roadmap for closing that gap in the future.
Awesome. And so when you find folks run this audit and you run this audit on behalf of customers as you're supporting them, what do you do with partners where seemingly that audit suggests there's a pretty big gap? Is that a tough conversation? Are they no longer a partner? Do you support them on leveling up? What does that look like? Like I said, that assessment or that audit suggests they don't have the capability or capacity to execute the way perhaps you need your partners to. What does that look like?
It's funny because not every partner is the same. And we always say that somebody's worst partner is someone else's best partner and vice versa, right? So not every partner to have the quota carrying sellers, to have the operational efficiency, to have the, right, engineer certified, to be able to, perform against the metrics that you have. And do they not? And if they don't have that capability, then there might be a difficult conversation that needs to be had. But if they do, and they simply have those resources elsewhere, then it's up to you to really incentivize that partner to work harder for you than they would say for one of your peers that they may be really performing to. So there's things that you can do like different partner propensity studies, right? What is their knowledge of your industry? What is their knowledge of your brand? What is their willingness to work with you? What is their perception of you? What is their intent? These are the things that can help you really define who you're going to go after and who you want to recruit. So that really, I'm kind of jumping ahead to my 4th point, but that really comes into recruitment of the revenue gap, right? So once your existing capacity is mapped, that gap really tells you what to recruit, right? So avoid over recruiting. I see this all the time where partner programs say, if we have a ton of partners, they'll automatically just sell in because our products just fly off the shelf, and how can they not sell it, right? Every engineer leader ever. But avoid over recruiting. You want to really look at the right partners, and then prioritize partners with proving sourcing motions for your brand and your product, and recruit into specific ideal customer profiles with structured onboarding and incentive plays. Mature vendors really only recruit when the business case justifies it with a clear playbook attached.
Interesting. When you say like recruit into a really clear ICP, I haven't heard many people talk about that. To your point, I've heard a lot of more partners, the better. I've seen it, where immature partner programs, they're incentivizing on partner recruitment as the primary incentive. And then, you wonder why, well, I've got like 3,000 partners, but no revenue. What's going on? I like that framing of recruit into like basically exactly what it is that you need. So you're kind of doing that mapping. You're looking at, okay, what are the types of accounts that we're selling into? Where do we have a gap penetrating those types of accounts? Let's go find partners that very narrowly kind of fit that need. Is that sort of part of the playbook and the advice?
Yeah, we always say when you are thinking about either your partner program strategy or your structure or your plan, or if you are refining or building a program from scratch, there are 2 questions you constantly need to ask yourself and re-ask yourself throughout all the processes that you have on your plate. And it's 2 questions. It's, what do your partners do that you cannot do? And what do your partners do that you do not want to do? And so if you can answer those two questions, that builds the foundation for your planning and strategy across all of your initiatives. And a big way that you need to factor into that is what type of customers do you need to go after that ideally, will benefit from your product, can move your product, can, rebuy your product, that can be return customers, that can really help you grow your revenue. And then how do those customers buy? And do your partners understand how these customers buy? And do they have the capacity and the willingness to go after these customers? Do they have the acumen to do that? And can they get you within these customers that you can't get into? And can they do things within your customer base that you don't want to do? I was talking to a prospective customer the other day that doesn't have a strong sales team, that is very lean on marketing. They needed to lean on a partner that had strong selling and marketing leadership. Those are things that they cannot and really honestly will not do. So how can they leverage their resellers who have that?
That's great. I like that. Any tips for folks on just general recruitment? So you know where you have gaps. You've identified partners that you want to recruit in. You've done that work. Any thoughts on what really lands in terms of that initial message to get their attention to start that recruitment process? And I ask that because partner recruitment, especially partners that fit the profile that you really need to be working with, one of the questions I get is like, I just can't get them to pay attention. I can't get them to respond. It's almost like cold outbound and, not that, it's not that successful these days in a lot of instances. How do I stand out? How do I do it better? How do I increase my response rates? Any thoughts there, best practices on that act and that part of recruitment?
Yeah, at the end of the day, partners are being pulled in so many different directions from so many different vendors, right? I talked to a partner the other day at an event that gets calls from probably 500 different vendors on a weekly basis, right? And they all have this awesome technology that, they say that they can make all this revenue with or solve all their problems and everything like that. Really, at the end of the day, partners don't really care how slick your product is, what it does. All they really want to know about is, can they make money with you? How are they going to make money with you? Who are they going to call if they have problems? Can they get that person on the phone or a response quickly? And do you understand their gaps and their challenges and their problems? And can you map your company to show how they're going to solve that problem? If you can answer those quick things for them and they know it right away, and at the end of the day that you were easy to do business with, they can make money with you, and that you remove any friction from earning their goals through your company, then they're going to flock to you, right? Plain and simple. And the great thing about it is if you can get, especially, let's say if you're targeting MSPs, often move in herds, and once they align with a vendor that is really helping them, move revenue on their side and gain more customers, they're going to tell their friends about it. And then it's so much easier to have that snowball effect, if you will, right? DSIs often work the same way. So does ISVs, right? So it's all about proving the fact that their problem. You can prove that they can, again, earn revenue in an easy way, and that they know how to work with you is huge.
Awesome. I like that. What's the next step in our playbook? I like this. It's very structured. It's amazing.
Well,
what do we do after recruitment?
The biggest thing is, you can have the best partners in your coffers, so to speak, and they can be enabled. They can have all these certifications. They've done all the right things, but there's something very critical that a lot of programs miss, and it's the ability to hunt. And you have to teach partners to hunt. That is a critical step in the playbook. Teach partners to hunt, not hope. So enablement is where a lot of plans fail. Product training alone does not move pipeline, right? You can show, I've seen so many programs that say, this is our top partner and they have 5 stars in our program, or they're a platinum plus, they have so many engineers, but they're not moving revenue. Well, can their salespeople hunt? Do they know how to do it? So you need to teach partners prospecting motions. You need to teach them ICP, ideal customer partner clarity, right? We talked a lot about ICP clarity earlier. You need to teach them demand gen workflows. You need to teach them marketplace activation, and you need to teach them co-selling steps. At Channelnomics, we often run partner advisory boards or partner advisory councils to test messaging, to test workflows and partner facing assets, because real partner feedback is really what makes motion stick. So make sure your partners have that selling capacity, make sure they know how to hunt, and make sure they have the willingness to hunt. I will say that one of the biggest detrimenting things of a partnership is when salespeople within a partner get too comfortable, meaning they are used to selling within a certain ICP or a certain account, and they get used to the revenue coming in. When they have to start, picking up their bag again and hunting, it's often hard for them once they get comfortable with that revenue. So get partners who have hungry salespeople who know how to effectively hunt.
Yeah. How do you combat what you just said, that comfort? When reps are comfortable with what they've been doing, presumably part of that comfort comes from the fact that they're probably hitting quota, if not exceeding quota. And so they're comfortable with that. How do you flip that? How do you reignite that urgency to go and hunt? What are some things that folks can do to drive that with partners?
Yeah. Well, I always say that good salespeople are motivated by money, right? And the way they make money is through effective compensation and through revenue plans, and they can map their activity to what they're going to bring home at the end of the day. So if a partner is getting, for lack of a better term, lazy or too comfortable because they're gaining so much revenue from an account that they hunted with, 3 or 4 quarters or years ago, and now they're just kind of farming the same account because why do I need to do anything if I can just sit back and relax and just collect all the revenue? You're going to probably need to tweak the comp plan or the revenue linkage to show, all right, we need to look at the MDF that's tied to the activity, that's tied to pipeline, that's tied to revenue linkage for this account, right? Sometimes you need to flip it on its head and say, maybe we're going to give this partner another account and do another, plan because you've done such a great job. Now, it may anger that partner, it may ruffle some feathers, but that is a good stress test to constantly define, do they have the capacity to hunt and to sell for you, right? So if you have plans that are tied to revenue from an existing account, great. But you also need to have plans tied to new logos. I actually had a meeting with a customer the other day that is doing a very aggressive new logo campaign within their partner base where they are paying up to 30% margin for any new logo a partner can bring in. Now, because of that rich comp plan, they have reduced the current repeat spell of renewals and everything like that in order to get their partners to really start recruiting net new logos. Does it ruffle some feathers? You betcha. But it's going to get those partners really motivated to start getting those new logos because of the potential of the amount of money that they can bring home.
Awesome. That's great. How would you suggest folks support their ability to hunt? And what I mean by that is your commission compensation model is certainly one of them. Some of the enablement around, perhaps what the co-sell motion can look like and best practices around there. But are you doing anything else in terms of, here are the target accounts? Like, are you providing very clear direction on what good looks like so you know where to hunt? Are you co-marketing with them before co-selling? And anything there that you would suggest people really lean into and make sure that they're investing into to help support that hunting?
Yeah, it's all about turning your strategy into workflows that are going to work for both you and the partner, right? So automation is really the key difference between theory and execution. So the best programs really unify channel strategy with partner management and tooling. So the steps that you take to onboard your partners, the incentives that you have in place, the activities that you require from them, the performance tracking, where does that all lead to? Why do you have these in place? And what are your key performance indicators for tracking what success looks like, right? And so you really want those live repeatable workflows instead of just, ad hoc spreadsheets, that say, all right, well, we have X amount of partners, they have X amount of customers, they can sell this amount of product, and ideally, we can reach this revenue target, right? You need to have, again, realistic things and processes that the partner can do in ways that you can tie back measurable success to that, and constantly measure and revisit those as well to ensure that you both, one, have capability to meet those, and two, that the partner has the willingness to achieve those as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Across this entire sort of workflow, the hard inputs, the capability sort of audit assessment, capability capacity, looking at recruitment, actually teaching partners to hunt, in all of that, you actually have, the documented plan that passes that sniff test. Where do you find the most common point of failure happens to be? And I guess the purpose is, if we know that up front, we can almost do like a pre-mortem, like really make sure that we're nailing this part, because it's typically where it fails. Where would you suggest partner leaders are ensuring they've mitigated for that point of failure?
That's a great question. I think that the number one point of failure that programs have is that they fail to define, and we talked about this earlier, they fail to define and map channel strategy to channel revenue, right? You have to map the two together. And it goes back to the fundamental plan of, what do your partners do that you can't do? And what do your partners do that you don't want to do? And you have to think of it as both of, what strategies are we going to put in place here that we have? What are the MDF structures that we have? What are the incentives we're putting in place? How are we enabling our partners? How are we going to onboard them? What does that program design look like? All of those factors need to tie into your ultimate goal, which is channel revenue, right? And what is the capacity? What are the pipeline contributions of your partners now, and where's the gap therein? And how are you going to fill that? What are the behaviors of your sellers within your reseller organization? Do you understand that? What are your targets, and why do you have them there? If you don't understand those, and you can't show that, and you can't tie the two together, and you don't have those constant stress tests, those credibility tests, those audits that we talked about earlier, if you can't tie those, it all goes back to credibility. And if you can't show credibility towards your plan, towards your revenue goals, towards everything like that, that's where programs fail. And often that's why leaders are oftentimes encouraged to seek other career opportunities, because they can't show that, and they can't speak the language that their executive staff needs to hear when it comes to channel contribution.
Yeah, I like that. That's awesome. I want to say back sort of what I typically see in terms of the plan, and see if that kind of matches what you're seeing. What I a lot of times see is, here's the plan. Here are the partners we're working with. We're working with them because we have this like great shared value prop. We already have some shared customers. We have this great better together story. And so, we're going to run, maybe these events together, and, do some of this co-marketing, and, we feel really good about it. Like, that's kind of typical of what I've seen as a plan. What I hear you saying is like, that's not a plan. Like, that is a semblance of maybe one day being a plan, but it is not connected to revenue. You haven't actually built out any sort of forecasting. Do they actually have the capacity to sell at the level that you need to hit your numbers? Is that kind of a similar gap that you're seeing, is like in the partner leader's mind? No, that I have a plan, but what you're seeing is the plan isn't connected to revenue. And that's where you miss out on that sniff test. Is that a fair articulation of what you're also seeing, or are you seeing something a little bit different?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, sponsoring trade show booths, the joint logos together, participating in, podcasts like you and I are doing right now, sponsoring events together, going after different campaigns together. All of those things are great, and they are great activities, and I'm not discrediting that. But oftentimes, if you don't understand the agenda on both sides of the table, because the partner has an agenda for partnering with you as a vendor. The vendor has an agenda for partnering with you as a partner. And if there isn't a clear-cut, defined agenda that is tied to revenue, that's a problem, right? And if you don't jointly understand what that agenda, what that ultimate goal is, how it's tied to revenue, how it's tied to your targets, how it's going to be worked into your constant AOP. All of those things are great, but they have to lead towards something. They have to lead towards your goal. You have to map whatever activity that you are doing to pipeline. You have to map that pipeline to bookings. You have to map that bookings to revenue, and that all has to tie back to all the efforts that you've set out to go ahead and do together.
Aligned. I like it. Great advice. One last question as we close out here. I think we've got a phenomenal playbook to follow, which gives us a really solid foundation. As folks look into, the rest of 2026, even into 2027, what's the number one thing that you're advising your customers to think about?
I would just say credibility. We talked about credibility earlier. You have to have credibility as a revenue leader. If you are a channel leader, you are also a revenue leader within your company, because your CRO and your CFO need to understand that the channel is a viable and critical part of the overall revenue plan. So you need to be looked at and credited as a revenue leader within that organization. And I talked about earlier, partner teams, you got to earn that seat at the table by speaking finances language, right? You need to have evidence-based plans. You need to have that capacity modeling. You need to have that instrumentation that, again, proves source influence across your customer buying journey and your partner selling journey, right? I would just say, final word of advice, align with your CFO and your CRO and your CEO and your entire C-suite early. Align early. Make sure that you are modeling your plan and your partner's capacity to perform honestly, and build enablement that teaches partners how to hunt, right? And clearly show your C-suite how your MDF or incentives or your plan is going to lead to activity. Show how that activity contributes to pipeline. Show how that pipeline leads to a revenue chain that is credible. You have to show your C-suite credible math, and you also need to be honest in any gaps that you see in, the sniff test, if you will, or in your capacity and capability audit, and show that's not a hindrance. It's actually a roadmap. And you can show a credible plan that how you're going to close the gap in that roadmap. That is how you're going to get a seat at the table, and that's how you're going to get your initiatives funded.
I think that is a perfect place to end, and a fantastic message for partner leaders. I appreciate the conversation. If folks want to reach out and maybe ask any follow-up questions or learn a little bit more about you and Channelnomics and what you're up to, how can folks get in touch?
Yeah, so great. Our website is channelnomics.com. You can go to it to see our public-facing thought leadership, intelligence, and research. We also have a membership program called Channelnomics IQ, or CIQ for short, where if you're interested, you can join a yearly program that you have access to all of our ungated, semi-gated, and gated content that shows trends, and again, all of our research and analyst intelligence as well. My email is amy.henderson@channelnomics.com if you ever want to reach out and ask us any questions. But there is a form fill on our website that you can ask any questions on that as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate it, and I'm sure you'll hear some at least a few folks. So
great. Well, thank you so much.
Be prepared. All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks. Thanks for listening to Get It Together. If you want more resources to help you build and scale your partnership program, be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. And get more proven tips and tools at partnerstack.com/getittogether.